Welcome to Shenanigans, the channel where a guy with too much free time on his hands makes videos about topics that will ultimately add nothing to society. This is the Docket where I rank stuff in order from best to worst, according to my own opinion. Today I will be discussing and ranking one of the most consistently great franchises of all time, Toy Story. Every single one of these films is critically acclaimed and has received numerous amounts of positive reviews from critics and audience members alike. What's also great about these films is that people's rankings vary massively, and for each opinion, it's easy to understand their point of view and very hard to argue against it, as each one of these films in its own right is a great film. For the rankings, I'll also be giving each film a score out of 10, and fair warning, I'm a harsh marker and any score I give that is over 8 is considered a great film by my standards. Now on to the rankings. Number 4. Toy Story 4. When this movie was first announced, I was skeptical to say the least. The first three movies were as perfect as a trilogy as you can get, and making a fourth film seemed unnecessary and a shameless attempt of a cash grab. Going in to see the film, I was more cynical and excited to see if they were going to Crystal Skull the Toy Story franchise. I'm glad to say they did no such thing. Toy Story 4 is a great film that really focuses on the challenges of different toys' mindset. There's Woody's anxieties of not being Bonnie's favourite toy, Forky's constant attempt to get rid of himself as he thinks he's trash. God, that is a lot darker when you read it out loud. And Gabby's longing for a new voice box, thinking it will fix all her problems and associates it with her being able to be loved by a kid again. I thought going into this Forky would be a more annoying character, but he was actually pretty funny and was able to establish himself as a solid comic relief character very well. And I really enjoyed the George and Lenny relationship that Woody and Forky develop. The side characters are some of the best that the Toy Story franchise has ever had. Bo Peep coming back as a battle-hardened toy was a fantastic call by Pixar and gave it a lot of depth and emotion to a character who was previously just a love interest for Woody. The Key and Peele characters were solid enough comedic characters, but the person who stole the show for me was Keanu Reeves as Duke Kaboom, Canada's greatest stuntman. His voice acting was superb, and the writing for this character was simply genius. The 40-foot jump scene generally made me laugh out loud, which I rarely do for a movie. However, as good as this film is, I do have one glaring issue with it, and that is that I believe it focused too much on just Woody and the new characters. Watching Toy Story since I was a child, I've grown up with some amazing characters like Buzz Lightyear, Jessie, Rex, Ham, Slinky, Mr. Butterhead, and much more. I really hope that they would have included more of these characters into the plot somehow, especially Jessie. I barely remembered she was in the movie when writing this. I thought they dumbed down Buzz for this movie, which to me just seems like a very strange decision to make, especially considering his roles in the previous films. Some people were upset with the ending of this, and although I thought the ending was good for Woody's story arc, I wasn't impressed how they ended it for the rest of the toys. But that again is just a complaint around the lack of original characters in the movie. Last note about this film is that Gabby, despite being a very relatable character and a good antagonist, is by far the worst villain in the Toy Story franchise. That's not any negative thing to say as well, considering the amazing villains that Pixar has created for this franchise, but since it is a ranking video, it does need to be said. Overall, I'd give Toy Story 4 an 8 out of 10. It really is an enjoyable film with great side characters, comedy, and important themes, but it does have certain problems which leads it to being at the bottom of the list. Number 3. Toy Story. Being the first ever 3D animated film, it's no underestimation to say Toy Story was groundbreaking. Toy Story was able to reflect human emotion in animation better than any other studio had been able to replicate at that time. The animation still holds up today and is even better than, well, some films. This first film introduced us to Woody, a good-hearted cowboy doll who belongs to a young boy named Andy, and sees his position as Andy's favourite toy jeopardised when his parents buy him a Buzz Lightyear action figure. Buzz does not realise that he is a toy, and actually thinks he's a real spaceman on a mission to return to his home planet, which causes a rift to immediately be apparent between the two. They are forced to form a bond when during Andy's family's moving to a new house, they get trapped and Woody and Buzz must escape the evil teenager neighbour Sid and reunite with Andy. The plot of this film is amazing and works so well because of the complex script design with a multi-dimensional lead character whose arc through the film is carefully constructed and designed. The best part of this film by far is definitely the main characters Buzz and Woody. Their contrasting personalities and ideas makes a very tense, realistic relationship between the two, and how it develops when they try to get back to Andy is especially brilliant to watch. This is also the first time we are introduced to the side characters we know and love in the future films, and the movie gives them a very strong introduction. They are well used as both comic relief and also as catalysts for the plot. There are a few flaws with this movie in my eyes, but Sid, although a great scary villain, lacks the empathy that we can feel with the other villains. Nitpicking, I would also say that the side characters aren't as strong as they are in other films of the series, but overall, still a fantastic movie that was revolutionary for 3D animation and still it's hold up against the test of time. I will be giving Toy Story an 8.5 out of 10. Number 2. Toy Story 3. Coming in at the number 2 spot is Toy Story 3. Originally this was at the top of my list, but for reasons I'll explain later on, it just narrowly missed out. Now this movie is truly incredible and definitely one of Pixar's finest works. This movie definitely has the best plot of any of the Toy Story films. With Andy preparing to leave for college, Woody, Buzz Lightyear, Jessie and the rest of the toys find themselves headed for the attic but mistakenly wind up on the curb with the trash. Woody's quick thinking saves the gang, but all bar Woody end up being donated to a daycare centre. Although at first it seems like a paradise, the gang soon realises that the section that they have ended up with is the uncontrollable kids section where they are getting battered, beaten and bruised. This leads to Woody and the gang trying to make plans for an escape, but soon realise that the other toys in the daycare are much more ominous than they first appeared. The majority of this film takes place in the Sunnyside daycare, and is a perfect oxymoron setting, with it being more of a toy prison rather than a toy paradise. The main villain, Lotso, runs the daycare like a prison warden and keeps the gang locked up while making Buzz Lightyear guard them, as he's resetted his factory settings and he has manipulated him into thinking that they are now enemies of the Space Academy. Lotso is one of the single greatest villains, not only in Toy Story but in 3D animation. This bear had me flip-flopping with 1 minute me hating him and the next minute me pitying him. Lotso has a tragic backstory of him getting lost by mistake and then travels all the way home through rough conditions only to find out that he's been replaced by another Lotso hugging bear, bought by the parents to keep the child happy. One of the things that makes Lotso such a great villain is that he is a clear representation of Woody if he had let his fear of being replaced get to him in the original Toy Story, as he would have ended up just as cruel and as evil as Lotso, which makes him easy to empathise with both for Woody and the audience. Comedically, this movie is on point, especially with scenes like Spanish Buzz being particularly funny. It does lack compared to some of the other Toy Story movies, but regardless, it is still great. It is impossible not to talk about the ending in this film. It is truly phenomenal. After the toys escape from the daycare doesn't go to plan, the toys end up in a garbage factory, where they are sent down a trash chute and into an incinerator. There's an incredibly touching moment where the toys are trying to escape, but no matter how hard they try, they can't. And want to take a guess at what the toys do? Well, they accept their inevitable death and hold hands as to not die alone as they slowly get closer and closer to the flame. Holy hell, I actually don't know what could make this more emotional. Maybe if they all started singing Kumbaya? Since this is a children's movie, they do get saved and Lotso is defeated, but for those few moments I genuinely thought they might actually kill off these characters. There is an added punch to the gut when the toys make it back to Andy's house, and then Andy goes to give them to a little girl named Bonnie, and just before he heads off to college, he gets to play with them one last time. The movie then ends with Bonnie waving Woody's hand as Andy's driving off, and this was the closest I've ever come to crying at a children's film. This at the time was the last Toy Story movie, and it had just ended on such a perfect emotional moment. This movie is just fantastic overall, and I have to give it a 9 out of 10. Truly a sensational watch. And the number 1 Toy Story movie is Toy Story 2. This film is tied up there as one of my favourite animated films of all time, with the likes of The Incredibles and the Lord of the Rings animated version. Ugh. Except him. It may also be one of the best sequels of all time, not just because of how much better it is compared to the original, but because of how much better it is than the original despite how great the original is. The plot is similar to the original Toy Story, but every aspect of this movie improves on it. Woody is stolen from his home by a toy dealer named Al McWiggin. This leaves Buzz Lightyear and the rest of the gang to go on a rescue mission after Woody. Woody discovers that he's actually a valuable collectible from a once popular television show called Woody's Roundup and is introduced to the side characters with Bullseye, Jesse the Odin Calendar, and one of the future villains, Stinky Pete the Prospector, who we find out doesn't want to be put back in the box and will go to any cost to make sure that doesn't happen. He finds out that Al wants to sell him to a museum overseas, and although hesitant at first, saying that he's Andy's toy and a toy should always be there for their kid, changes his mind after learning about Jesse's tragic backstory of abandonment. Yes, in case you haven't noticed, this is a recurring issue in the franchise. Some people critique Woody's decision here and believes that it's out of character of Woody compared to how he was portrayed in the last film. But the reason I believe he makes this decision is because he's under a huge amount of pressure that if he doesn't go, they can't go because the collection is only valuable with him. Without him, the entire collection is deemed worthless and all three of them stay behind and they don't end up being played with or even going to a museum. Buzz and the gang, after facing multiple challenges, finally reach Woody and eventually convince him to return to Andy by reminding him of what it means to be a toy. Woody then gets trapped by Stinky Pete in the luggage and the toys have to go after him, and there's a really great kind of action sequence where they're going actually through the airport and trying to get Woody back, and it's probably the best action sequence in my opinion in the entire franchise. It's very entertaining, and especially with all the luggage carousels kind of action and trying to guess which bag he's in, I thought that was really well done and well animated. After rescuing Woody, the film ends with Woody convincing Jesse and Bullseye to come live with Andy and to give being a toy a second chance. This movie's use of characters is one of its biggest strengths and one of the reasons I love it so much. Unlike other movies in the series, Toy Story 2 uses nearly every single character it introduces to its full potential. Jessie's character exudes the confident, energetic cowgirl we expect, but also shows how emotionally scarred she still is from the betrayal that she feels from her owner's abandonment. Rex, Ham, Slinky and Mr. Potato Head are used to the fullest extent they can be, with that either enhancing the plot or being used effectively as comic relief. Buzz is definitely at his best in this movie, and the idea of him being switched out with essentially him initially from the first Toy Story is pure brilliance. I've also never laughed more, for an animated film anyway, when they do the whole I am your father joke. Buzz shows how his character has grown from the first film, with the roles being essentially uno reversed between him and Woody, as he has to remind him what it means to be a child's toy. The comedy is my favourite out of all the films, especially with the use of the Buzz swap and also, Al. Come on, he owns that giant chicken suit. I said when talking about the third Toy Story that it was originally at the top of my list, but I changed my mind after thinking about it in depth. The reason why it was at the top originally was that I believed the plot was better, and also Lotso as the villain was unbelievable. Although I still believe both of those things to be true, the two reasons I changed my mind were this. A, the plot in the third film wasn't that much better that you could say Toy Story 2 was not in the same league of storytelling. And B, Lotso is the greatest villain, hands down. But I don't believe he's great enough to be able to beat the three villains this movie has with Stinky Pete, Al, and Zurg. In Toy Story 3, all the other side villains apart from Lotso are very forgettable, but all three of the villains in Toy Story 2 are memorable and play to the story very well. As I said before, I think Zurg ripping off Darth Vader is especially funny and well done. I can't praise this film enough, and my overall score for it is going to be 9.2 out of 10. If you haven't seen it, go do. I guarantee you, you won't regret it. Well, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider subscribing. This is my first attempt at a YouTube video, so any criticism, as long as it's not too harsh, is well advised. And I would love to continue making these for you, so if you have any ideas for future videos that you'd like to see me do, please leave it down in the comments. And until next time, This is Shenanigans, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.